Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final session on the last day of the Modern Sales Pros Summer Virtual Summit with the wonderful clickbaity title of The Funnel is Dead. Over the past couple days, we've brought together speakers and panel discussions and had amazing peer learning sessions, all focused on evolving your organization from thinking about things function out to customer in. We've been killing the funnel so long, I'm forgetting the spiel. Part of that is because your customers and prospects don't wake up in the morning and decide that today is the day they're going to be a stage 4 opportunity, and now they're going to get to see your product. And we need to stop thinking about treating them that way. As part of our sessions, we've talked about how to align sales, marketing, customer success. We've talked about how to get the data into one place, how to use video to personalize, and a number of other topics. And all of these sessions wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of all of our great sponsors. Today's session, as we dive into one of the more important parts and one of the more complex topics, is around compensation, and it wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Spiff. Really excited to be having this conversation. It's a fun capstone for the rest of the conversations that we've had. And for those of you who are on our conversation this morning, talking about aligning sales, marketing, and customer success, there's a lot of questions about compensation and motivation. And I can tell you, we've had an opportunity to work with Spiff now. I think, Tanner, is it 4 years at this point? 3 years? 4 years?
Yeah, probably about 3.
Yeah, 3 years. Spiff has been a great partner, a true partner to MSP, both in helping us elevate our own game and also bring interesting, creative, and exciting content to the community. So really excited to have this conversation here today. But before we jump into things and go through a few housekeeping notes, I do just want to give a shout out to the team behind the scenes. Everything that we do at Modern Sales Pros is a ton of work. We take a ton of pride in the quality of content that we deliver to our community members. And I just want to take this minute to thank the team behind the scenes who maybe you got a chance to meet at networking or at our reception. But huge shout out to Gina, Nora, Hannah, Taylor, and Elizabeth. They're some of the best in the world at what they do, and everything that you've seen here wouldn't be possible without them. So huge thank you to them. And if you haven't had a chance to meet them and thank them in person or virtually in person, we've actually got some networking sessions coming up next week. Great opportunity for you to join and thank everybody there. But just one housekeeping note before I hand it off to Tanner to introduce himself. This session will be recorded. Please do use the Q&A panel to make sure that we're kind of managing your questions correctly. And with that, I'm going to provide a little bit of context, and I'm going to hand it off to Tanner Lacey to introduce himself. When we think about creating a world that is focused customer in as opposed to function out, compensation and motivation plays a huge part in it. When we think about creating advocates, not just customers, but creating advocates from the people that are using your product, compensation and motivation plays a huge part in it. I'm really excited to be joined by Tanner Lacey, one of the co-founders at Spiff, to dive in today and talk about, we're going to explore a few different concepts around compensation and motivation to drive great behaviors that we can use to create advocates. Tanner, thank you so much for joining us here. Excited to have you back on.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. And everyone, so great to be here. Rich, the one question I didn't get to ask you in prep is, as I've been thinking, I think this is your last kind of class, right, for the event?
This is the last one until next time. Yes.
So should I take that personally or like as a positive note that you put me at the end?
I think that, so I would look at it like this. The most important leg of the relay race is the last leg. It's typically given to the strongest runner or the strongest swimmer. So I would take it as a compliment.
Okay, deal. We'll just leave it at that then. Perfect. So everyone, super great to be here. Just a little bit about me. Tanner Lacey, they call me the director of go-to-market strategy. Having been a co-founder and been fairly young in my career when I helped found Spiff, essentially I've done a little bit of everything. So I've ran implementation, I've ran CS, I've been in sales, I've closed deals on my own. And so I've had a full last 4+ years of pretty much doing nothing but understanding and learning about compensation. I know you're jealous. That sounds like a really fun thing to do for 4 years, like 80 hours a week. But I've loved working with the team at Modern Sales Pros, and I'll do it at the end as well. But just want to give them a hand for all the work they put into all of these events. This one's specifically as we're in it now, but we feel really grateful that we get a chance to partner with the MSP group here. Some of my really good friends that we get to work with. So again, I guess I was going to say a few other small things about me. Moved around a lot from Utah is where I'm at now. I'm actually living in Hawaii for the summer, so it's still a little early for me. And I'm in an Airbnb that doesn't have great lighting, so hopefully that's there. And lived in San Francisco, moved around. And for any of you that were not connected, please add me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you.
Tanner, I have my first question before we jump into this. So if I study compensation for 80 hours a week, how long until I get to move to Hawaii? When does that happen? Just curious. I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah, so probably 2.5 years you can pass. That's probably a good line to draw in the sand.
All right, that sounds reasonable. I'll let my friend know. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. It's been, for anyone who's debating on moving to Hawaii for a summer for whatever reason, 2 thumbs up over here. So let's talk about compensation, right? Everyone's favorite thing. So there's 2 parts to this presentation that I want to get us into. The first part, I'm going to hit some points that you probably already know. I'm just going to call it out there. And these are, I want to boil it down. I want to talk about the basics of compensation, what it is and what it could be, right? And then from there, I actually want us to boil it down to build that foundation on how you can reach your full potential. So originally, compensation was originally designed to incentivize employees. Fun fact, incentive compensation has been around since money has been invented, right? People when they were trading, whatever, there was always an incentive to do a better job or to get a better price or whatever. People were paid on a variable basis. And that was it's just a natural form of motivation. Now, as we've advanced, right, over the last thousands of years, we've also started to use this as a strategy to continue to grow an organized workforce. So we're using it to motivate. We're trying to pull different triggers. We're trying to play psychology games with our teams. Good psychology games, by the way. These aren't bad, or at least not always bad. And we want to create advocates as well on our teams and in our customer base. So again, this is what it is. This is what we're trying to get to. Right now, what's interesting is comp is changing as the culture around the world changes. What's becoming more and more important to different individuals isn't so much just pay. I actually don't have the research on this, but my guess is if they ran this survey right here, which is on Business Wire, I can link this survey to anyone who would like it, is essentially I bet 100 years ago, compensation would sit at the front. People work to make money, not just because they want to do meaningful work, right? There's this kind of evolution on why people are doing what they do and what's most important to them. You'll hear over and over again that people don't always leave their jobs for the compensation. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about my opinions on that and what we're trying to see in our data at Spiff. But it's a really interesting, and it's also kind of fun to look at the different countries here and see where it's at. France right now, funny enough, is the only one that still has compensation at the top. And our CPO is from France, so I made sure to give him a good time when I saw that.
That's really interesting. I think it's a good, everyone take a look through this. And Tanner, when you get a sec, please do share that. We'll share it as part of the follow-up. But it certainly aligns with a lot of the things that maybe we've exposed or had conversations about as a result of the pandemic. Flexible hours, company culture. Look at that, office locations, the top 6 thing here, domestically in the States. It's interesting that there's a lot of organizations that are going partially or fully remote now. Oh, look at that. What's that going to do for you? It's impressive stuff.
Yeah, it was a really cool study to read. And then Elizabeth the Rich, if you guys actually have the presentation open, it's linked in the speaker notes there. I can't access it here, but if you guys want to post it in the chat there as well, it's a Business Wire article that talks a lot about this. I don't think there's anything revolutionary here, right? I'm not trying to teach you something new around people are happiest when they're productive, right? And I think that shows here. You see doing meaningful work becoming the number one, which I think productivity has a lot to do with that. And trying to get to this, right? Trying to get to this state we're starting to really boil down like how we're motivating people to make them feel like they're doing meaningful work. So cash, power, prestige, experiences, all extrinsic motivators. But we use those to try to drive these intrinsic motivators, right? We're trying to get to like, we're trying to enable people to like understand their purpose and to get better at something, to do their own. So like there is like a science and art to motivating your employees to be happy when we're looking at this chart right here, right? So intrinsic, extrinsic. I know everyone kind of has their own opinions on the balance there. It's a very interesting topic that we could probably talk about for hours just on itself as a masterclass, or anything. So if someone wants to talk about this for me with me for hours, send me a LinkedIn note. We'll chat. But overall, like something like this is where compensation is. This is what it can be, right? And more than anything, again, my last note in my boring compensation 101 presentation here is the fact that like not only do we understand like we need to motivate people and we can use compensation to do that, and that compensation is just the baseline of that, but also the time frame in which you're doing that is important, right? So I think like going back, the idea that I'm hoping that we're coming away with here from this first part of this presentation is the fact that like compensation and motivation are important. There's a better way to do it, and creating a organization, like creating a structure that's highly visible, that is faster as far as the payout, something that's like, for example, sometimes you see people who don't get paid out for like a quarter after they close a deal. There might be something in there for you to try to increase to hit those these nice things right here, like how fast something immediacy does play a role. You know, there's another study in here as well that we can link to this. It's very interesting. So I'll make sure we get that out there.
I mean, I think that if you pull that through a little bit, it does kind of make some sense, right? Even just if you kind of hack it through a little bit and how we operate as people, right? Like, hey, cool. If there's a way to reward me close to getting something done, I'm going to get that dopamine kick right away versus like, I'm going to send out and get my reward, let's say 6, 8, 10 weeks later, like, oh yeah, that's right. What did I just get this check for? Oh, because I closed the, Portco X deal however long ago it was. So I think that makes sense to kind of roll through it.
Yeah, 100%. And like motivation is all, in a lot of ways, is all about dopamine, right? Like if you want to get scientific about it, like you want this to be the ball that you're rolling, you want the snowball down the hill, right? And if you wait too long after that initial like dopamine of like, hey, I just closed that big deal, it's going to lose its value, and the motivation that you're actually getting from that is lower. Now, like there are things you have to balance here. Like let's just throw that out there. Like you have to balance like cost and liability, but oftentimes there's a middle ground and a way to do it, to kind of create that. So like, again, perfect scenario, something that's getting paid faster, something that's actually helping people feel like they're doing more than just making money, and making them feel rewarded, but also that their baseline needs are met. And I think that's kind of like a good transition point here. So we see kind of this ideal state. Now let's talk about like something that I think is really important with this ideal state in mind. And you guys are going to see this chart here that you haven't seen since biology 101, right? Funny, like the first thing when I put this in my presentation was I made a public apology to all of my teachers who I said, hey, I'll never ever use this in my life, for all of those classes that I said that on. I've eaten those words a few times now. So parents in the audience, if you have kids who are saying that, just have them come talk to me, because it's this sometimes actually happens. So but for anyone who's not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's this idea that it's pretty well like respected across, I mean, more than just one discipline, that like there's this like hierarchy of things that you need to be successful and happy in life. The first are like physiological needs, safety needs, whatever. The self-actualization is like kind of like hitting that potential, like feel like you're doing meaningful work. And I thought this was interesting, and I compare this a lot to my, like when I'm talking about compensation strategy, like this thing is very true. This idea, this theory here is really important to understand, because there has to be some basic needs met in compensation to be able to reach those next goals, that ideal state that we're talking about. So this is all good and great, right? Like making people feel like they're doing meaningful work is awesome. I guarantee you, if you're not compensating them well, though, they won't feel like they're doing meaningful work at some point, right? They might, but you will burn them out. So this is where I want to make something that I kind of like a step on how you get to there. To build a really good self-actualized, I guess, compensation plan, you need to build this foundation here. And I'm going to focus a lot here on this, like initially the physiological and safety needs, which I think are just basic compensation strategy. Everything else can get a little bit more like, again, art versus science as you're trying to help people get there. But I want to propose something that isn't always taken or thought about when you're actually doing your comp planning. And that's that you should start with your customer. And from there, work your way backwards, right? So when you're starting with your customer, I know that sounds weird because your customer is part of this, like the sale, they're there, but like, what does the customer have to do with your comp strategy, right? How does your customer and how they act and how they live really like help make your employees reach self-actualization in their comp plans, right? So I want us to think about it this way. If you want your employees to feel like they're doing work that matters, if you want to feel like they're contributing to something, if you don't want them to get burnt out, you need to create a comp structure that improves the lives and the situation of your customers. Now, like we'll go through some examples of that first, but if you aren't making your customers' lives better, you will have a hard time creating a compensation that doesn't drive up or doesn't help your attrition problems or help create happy employees. So it's important, again, to start with the customer and any goal really that you're starting with your company, right? It's oftentimes easy to think about bottom line and revenue, but starting with your customer in general on any planning, compensation in particular for this press. Think about it with every step, every accelerator. Are you aligning your needs with the customer and what they need? We'll go through some examples here in a second. And just think about how this will affect the customer, right? So Rich, I want to kick it to you. Like thoughts, what are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. And for those of you who attended our session literally earlier today, there was a lot of conversation about this and some of the tactics, which Tanner, I know we'll talk about here in a second. But one of the things that was maybe not obvious about this, or as David, you've been kind of here all week, so it's starting to permeate into you, but the customer should be at the center of everything. That's like a no-brainer. But much like many first principles or strong values, the rubber really hits the road and when you have to challenge it, right? Well, we need to generate more pipeline, so let's just reward the SDRs for generating pipe. And well, we got to close it even if it's bad pipe, and we know it's not exactly the right fit for the company, so we got to pay folks to get it closed. And then, well, sorry, customer success, you're left holding the bag, and these people aren't going to be happy. I can't remember who we were chatting with, but we had a conversation about this concept. And the biggest deal in the history of the company couldn't actually use the product. It was like they were selling a push notification service, and this vendor, this big customer that bought didn't need it. It was great. I mean, maybe you could argue it was great sales, but that's a customer who was going to churn because there was no way for them to deploy. So it requires some discipline, and much like anything that's a value, it requires discipline when tested, and your VCs are going to put it to the test because they're going to say, hey, Tanner, we need that 4x growth. Your sales team is going to put it to the test by trying to juice the metrics and get to accelerator land. But this is much harder to do than it is to say. And it's something where if you attended our session earlier today, there was a lot of conversation about like, okay, great, how do I think about this problem? And it's all of those areas are really hard to do when the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's like, it's not natural, I guess. Like it's really easy to focus on you and your problems as far as like the company is concerned. And it's a lot harder to actually think like pair that with how you also make your customers happy and like balance this revenue goal that you're also having to share with your board, right? So that's such a good way to put it. So I think like, again, what this does though for you and your team, if you're able to make this happen, we'll go through some examples, is you're going to start creating meaningful work. Like let's just go through an example right now, right? So let's use the old, like everyone's favorite like interview tactic, right? Like you're going to sell someone a pen. Like everyone loves that conversation when you go into an interview, you sit down and they hand you a pen, they're like, hey, sell me this pen. I thought a lot about that as I was kind of prepping for this, and just in some of the the research I've been doing on compensation recently. And now, like, let's look at a few scenarios, right? So let's say that whatever pen you're selling to your customers, like you might actually make more money selling lots of pens to your customer, right? So let's say that it's more profitable for you as a company to sell 20 pens to a customer versus one pen and 20 inserts, like, or replacements for that pen. Like, I'm not a pen expert, sorry. Like, I'm just trying to draw against something I think we're all fairly familiar with. The fact is, though, is that in a lot of ways, selling the insert, like, or the replacement ink versus selling 20 pens might actually be more beneficial for your customer in a lot of ways, right? Now, there's still going to be a benefit for your sales rep to try to sell 20 pens. There always will be. But also making sure that you incentivize them to do what's best for the customer. And that making sure that they're not hurt in that same step will create happier employees. So granted, your margins might be a little bigger, but your attrition, which is often a lot of times more expensive than margins, should go down if you're aligning your work with your compensation into something that's meaningful. So that's just one example, right? Or if you're like packaging things, line item things, like they're only comped just on general ARR, you might not actually be like selling value to the customer. You might just be selling product, which those don't always link, right? Rich, I saw you like a couple nods in there. What do you think?
I love, no, there's a point here too, where like compensation, there's a few first principles that Tanner's alluding to, but like, you can't compensate your way out of bad hires. You can't. If you have hires that for whatever reason don't align with the organizational philosophy that you've got and how you want to service and treat your customers, that's okay. But those folks should get a generous severance, even if they've been a top performer. I'll DM me if you disagree with that, and I'm going to take that one. That's a very core principle, because you can't pay somebody to do something that's out of alignment with their core values. And as an organization, it requires good understanding. But the other point, and David Fox mentions this, Tanner, I'm not sure if you can see the chat panel, but it's like the foundation of business, right? It's like starting and really falling in love with solving a customer's problem and then working backwards to that solution. That then should cater to how you hire, how you compensate, and the different elements of it. But that part on attrition, like, I think, and I don't want to turn this into a philosophical discussion. People generally like want to feel like they're doing good work. I don't think there's a lot of people out there who are like, yeah, I'm throwing slop over the fence to the customer success team and everybody hates our product and I'm happy. Like that doesn't last. And what Tanner is hitting on here is the cost to retain versus the cost to attract. And like, if you've got good employees, and I don't know what the latest is on this, and Tanner, you can keep me honest, but I think Betts Recruiting has said in the past, I think it's like 18 months salary for an AE, for an account executive. It takes 18 months salary worth of effort to replace a bad AE, or if an AE churns that you weren't planning for. And I'm sure as you go up and you look at a manager, you look at a director, it increases even more. Tanner, do you have any stats on that? I'm sorry to put you on the spot with it, but I think that attrition point is really important, but like it brings it home and you're like, no, that's a big problem if you get that wrong.
Totally, yeah, I don't actually have the stats on that. But what you're saying though, I feel like that's what I read in when Betts was talking about it last. For anyone who's interested, they always put out great information on that. Betts Recruiting does. But like usually it's at least a year's salary. So like between training costs, like the whole cycle, the time that you take, everything, usually you're talking a year's worth of salary at least to replace really any employee, but especially a sales employee.
Yeah, I think the other part on this too, right? Your compensation is also like, that's one of the many ways you show an employee. And again, this might be two first principles for some folks, but it is a way that you show an employee a reflection of your values as an organization, what you're going to accept and what's not going to be acceptable, and help them set there. The other point underpinning a lot of this, and I know we're talking kind of, hey, you got to think customer in and all that. It's really important to have a disciplined process that you're running behind the scenes here. Back to Tanner's point, like, you still have to responsibly run a business, right? It's not all do absolutely the right thing by the customer and good things happen. Like there is a business component to this. So there is a balance you have to have between the operating plan and how you're thinking about compensating and rewarding the team for doing the right things by the customer. So just, I'll put that last like caveat in there for the more operationally, somebody's in there saying, oh, well, my CFO will never go for this. It's like, well, there's balance there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, especially as you start driving into the attrition piece, and it's really true. Like I think oftentimes we don't factor that into like how we're building our compensation is like how much does it cost. Like a lot of the times you'll hand something to the finance team and they'll say, hey, that's going to put us over X amount over budget, right? Which is fair. That's what finance is meant to be doing.
Yes.
But a lot of the times you don't factor in if your compensation plan is not going to help you get to that spot where you have lower attrition, the cost of that, there'll actually be a cost, additional cost to that as well.
Somewhere out there, I think it was Ben Horowitz wrote a blog post that your spreadsheet is not my effing business. And in that, and it was talking about the relationship between the CFO and the rest of the organization. Like it might balance itself out in the spreadsheet. That's cool, but like that's not the business. Like that's just the spreadsheet. And to Tanner's point here, there's other things that maybe you can't quantify in the operating plan there.
Totally, and I think that's a kind of a good segue here to like this next spot where it's like not only do you need to get your AEs in a spot where they feel like they're actually adding value to the customer throughout that, you also need to align the rest of your organization with that same thought. So like there's the classic one here, right? Where it's like AEs are comped to close deals and customer success is comped to keep deals, right? And to upsell on deals. And there's so much in between there. I know I'm really overgeneralizing here, but the fact is that's not actually like a very conducive environment that you're building right now. Like again, overgeneralization. A lot of people make this work great. We do similarly at Spiff, right? That's how we comp. But the idea here is that like if you have the wrong way that you're incentivizing inside of those roles, you actually can create a counterintuitive structure where reps and AEs are just trying to get stuff in the door and customer success is just trying to keep things in the door. Or like you're trying to force groups into this spot where like some people might not be great customers, some people might not be great business to keep. You might have, especially as you're smaller, like we had this experience at Spiff when we were newer, we had customers that were more expensive to us than they could ever pay. And granted, like some of those things are learning costs and you have to go through that anyways. But if you don't have that alignment where reps are actually selling value to the customer and there's some checks and balances to make sure they're also signing up good customers, you're setting up your customer success team for hell to try to keep these customers, keep them happy, keep the expectations correct. And that just is throughout the entire organization. War stories there for you at all, Rich, or anything?
Oh, I've got a whole bunch. I feel like we're going to turn into a philosophy discussion if we keep going here. But one of the things that's important too with this, and I've seen this amongst different organizations that we work with at MSP. I've seen this amongst some of these conversations is this difference between the abundancy versus the scarcity mentality. AEs, depending on the organizational dynamics, can have a scarcity mentality. And by that, I mean, they go, well, if I don't close this deal, I'm not going to find another deal. I have to close this. This is how I'm going to get my bread buttered. That mindset shift, that is an organizational thing. If we go back to that kind of hierarchy of needs, if you think of a hierarchy of what an AE needs to close a deal, right? They need to see, at this sort of physiological level, or if there was a pyramid of, sales hierarchy of needs, right? They need support from other parts of the business to do it, right? If the product doesn't work, eventually that catches up with you. If the marketing is marketing one thing and the product does something else, that catches up with you and you deal with that in sales. So like the abundance mentality is important, but it takes an organization to make that happen, which then back to Tanner's point, that's how you get AEs comfortable disqualifying deals. That's how you get AEs saying, hey, Tanner, this is a really great conversation. We're not the right fit for you. Security is incredibly, incredibly important to you and it's core to what you do. And this other vendor works with this. For those that want some specific examples of like that talk track, Todd Capone's keynote talks a lot about being flawsome, knowing where you are and where you're not, who you are and who you're not, and understanding why you do it that way. The other piece, if you go back to the compensation slide, we've jammed on this before on the sales engineering piece, but like if you goof on sales engineering comp, it's that attrition cost is really high, but you also goof on, like sales engineers have an outsized impact on an organization, just like sales operations or revenue operations, just like a product manager does on a product. You mess up maybe AE comp or you mess up an AE and they game their comp plan, that's one thing. Sales engineers are another, because sales engineers are kind of your technical diligence on the business work that the AEs are doing. So I think that's important. I do want to throw a question at you though, Tanner, and this came up this morning. Organizations where there is, and I'm putting Tanner on the spot for this, he's not prepared. So hopefully not catching you flat-footed, organizations that have a professional services component, where there's a professional services kind of add-on piece. How have you seen that exist in sort of post-sale, right? Where customer success is maybe adding in a professional services component because you're trying to do something new. How have you seen compensation for that like shake out in organizations?
Yeah, so I have a little, just to call it out, I have a little bit of a bias here because I do think that the market as a whole across any type of software is trying to move away from professional services heavy type of things. So like I have a little bias there. So right now, what I think you're seeing is CS is generally still comped on this, but they're generally, their comp is much heavier on things like just general retention and upselling. Like they're not necessarily viewing the services side of things as like a quota or something that's going to be a necessary upsell. Also, like I'll just use us as an example. We're trying to minimize those costs for our customers, and that's kind of the position that we're taking. Is like, hey, we have partners, we have I mean, if we're using like an implementation partner or something, that's a little different. But if we are using it internally, we have a customer who's working with us, we're trying to minimize the amount of time that you have to spend with us. And it's actually beneficial for us as a company too. And so we're trying to align that way where like we try to fix things first, we try to train the customer first, and we compensate our CSMs and AMs according to that. Professional services, if they have to go that route, we generally try to make it as cost effective for them as possible and as quick for us as possible too. So like I think it's a really interesting, it really depends on the type of organization you are, the structure that you have. I just would say in general, using professional services, especially for the SMB mid-market, is really trying to go away. Enterprise is a little different there, right? But just making sure that you're aligned on that across your CSM org is important.
Yeah, and I think it's something too where Tanner, I love your point. It might be a little bit of a legacy thing. I think there are some organizations where when you're selling to, I don't know, Verizon, let's say. I mean, imagine Verizon's used to buying software and services as a package, and I think that can also, back to Tanner's point, create some weird incentives for organizations. The other piece that we started to talk about, and I wanted to save this conversation for here, was around organizations where AEs are the ones leading commercial discussions, whether it's with an existing customer or whether it's with a new customer. So AEs, essentially in the world, AEs handle renewals and CS is just focused on successing customers, for lack of a better word. How have you seen CS comp plans set up in that world, where the AEs are handling the transact and the commercials and all of that?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of mixing it up, first off, and I actually think like there's a lot of data out there that shows you want to give, it's often hard to give CS full control over their compensation, right? Because there's so many different variables. So finding some balance between like an MBO or like a management-based objectives section of things they're working on, numbers they're trying to hit, but then also having a book of business based is often good. It also really depends on the function of your CSMs. I see a lot of people moving towards like a quality score, where if they're mostly on chat or mostly on calls because they're more transactional, where they're actually getting those chats and calls graded on some sort of score, some sort of, however you're doing that. Some people even have like QA teams who are going through and doing those. But a lot of the times, like you're in these SaaS businesses, even for just someone, even if sales is the one who's running the commercials, oftentimes the renewals will fall under CS still. And even if they don't, a lot of the times, like they will share the blame with the reps if someone doesn't renew. So you still generally see a good chunk of their compensation tied to some sort of book of business. But I think, again, it really depends on your sales cycle, on your product, et cetera. But usually you see some sort of mix in there. And I believe that's probably the best way to go generally.
Yeah, it feels like in that world, it's almost like maybe a metric to think about there could be, I don't know, CS qualified leads, CS qualified up, CS QOs or something.
Yeah,
could be something. Could be something there. Live question coming in from David Fox here. Best practices on pod compensation. This has been a topic that's come up quite a bit over the last couple of days in Modern Sales Pros, both in the discussion and in our conversations like this. And just to set context for folks who aren't familiar, a pod model is when you've got kind of a pod, literally a pod of resources. Think about your pre-sales team, right? So your sales development, AE, maybe it's your sales engineer, and your post-sales technical resources all focused on a vertical, a region, a geo, a one level of deal. How have you seen that type of organization structure influence compensation?
So there's a few things that you see when you pod people up or build teams like that, right? And the biggest one is that you need to have some sort of shared celebration with the group. So like you need to have your compensation weighed out enough to where your BDR, your SE, your AE, your team lead, team pod leader, whatever, that it's a big enough chunk where that team feels that continuity or that like synergy to work together on it. A lot of the times we have that now, but the way that you like BDRs generally get compensated on deals they set that close, but the communication around that on average isn't great. Like it's usually not like this team effort where you're working through this whole process. So I think in general, that's a good way to look at it is like, how are we celebrating the wins? And I think it comes back to the same thing of like, you just really have to make sure that your comp plans are aligned, especially on a team structure like that, because when you're working so closely with individuals, if there's any friction on how you're comped, it can be a mess. But on the flip side too, you also don't want your AEs qualifying every single deal that your BDR gets, because it's gaming the system that way for their friend who's the BDR. So I'm a big fan of pods. I also think that pods need to be switched up fairly often in those roles. I think SEs and BDRs need to be fluctuated through those pods fairly often, in some regards at least. But it's definitely its own thing. But you just have to think about it being its own little team. You gotta make sure that you're compensating a common goal there.
Yeah, it feels like there's two components to it, just to sort of paraphrase Tanner. Correct me if I'm summarizing this wrong. There's one component where there's like a shared responsibility where maybe the vertical grows by X, or we close this many logos, something that's pod. And then those individual components being probably similar in some way, shape, or form to what they were in a non-pod model, but just with more of an emphasis on sharing and communication across.
Yeah, and I think you did a way better job than I did, kind of like laying that out there, Rich. I think the next thing too is with pods, and to me, one of the most beneficial parts of a pod is mentorship and growth for your team. And so making sure that you build that in there, that your reps, your BDRs have an opportunity to start to learn from your AEs, your SCs have an opportunity to learn. Like there's got to be some continuity there and some team feeling to really make those work, comps included in that.
Yeah, I think and we did a whole session with the team with Connor Cox, the Chief Revenue Officer at Proposify, and they're a quarter and a half into the pod models, and it's kind of like the good, bad, and ugly. And he's very transparent about what works and what doesn't. If you're interested to double click into that, folks, I'd encourage you to check that out on YouTube, because it's interesting. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's we talked about this forever ago on MSP, Rich, but like I couple pods in with team leads, where it's like, if you can do it right, it's really beneficial. It's just really hard to do it right. So
I think also, folks, especially with pod models, it's like, what problem are you solving for? And the important part about what Connor's story with Proposify is, like, they had a data-driven hypothesis that this was the right thing. They weren't doing it because they heard about it on an MSP event. So I'd encourage folks, as Tanner was saying, like, dive in and do some research here, because if you do it right, it can be really powerful. But the opposite is also
totally. Well, Rich, all this like finish this out real quick, and then if we can go there to more Q&A, because I think the biggest thing that I'd love for everyone to take away from this that was really interesting to me as I was researching it is, like, there's a right way to compensate people to get to the right spot, right? People want more than just money. They want to kind of feel like they're doing something good. They want to be a part of a team. Like there's a lot more to create happy employees. And that starts by building a great foundation. So that foundation needs to be simple, visible, timely, but at the same time, it needs to be customer focused. If you want the rest of that pyramid to be able to fall in place to where you have a positive cycle for your compensation plans, which is important, you need to be able to build that foundation off of a consistent customer need, a consistent customer strategy. If you don't do that, it'll work. You're just going to have more friction than you would like. You're going to have more attrition than you would like. It's kind of a good, better, best way. But would challenge anyone who's getting ready to do comp planning here in the next few months to take that. So go look at your customer. What makes your customer successful? And how can you build your how can you compensate your BDRs in a way that attributes to that, right? How can you compensate your AEs in a way that contributes to that? Your SEs, CSMs, AMs, even your whole organization. Here at Spiff, we do company-wide comp plan, right? Where, I mean, obviously we're very commissions focused here at Spiff. But it's been really interesting what that's done to our whole organization, as there's actually a common goal where there's accelerators around different things. I would call it's very similar to like a revenue share if you have revenue shares at your organization, but we do have accelerators and even decelerators in there for the share that gets taken with each employee. So but everyone, this was a lot of fun. I don't know how, I think we went overtime here, so I'll let Rich tell if we have more questions, but.
Yeah, I think any last questions for Tanner? We could go for probably another 5 minutes. I know we had told folks we'd get out of here soon. I was thinking about something here, Tanner, as we think about comp planning and all of that. One of the things, if somebody wants to go and change their comp plan, you've mentioned communicate. Any best practices on communicating changes to comp plans to teams? Because I feel like that's a really tricky area.
Yeah, so I'm actually writing an article on this right now, so it's really good timing. A couple of things that I would say is, one, even if you're not going to necessarily use it, ask for advice from the team. So the people that you're going to be changing things for, make them feel heard. Let them understand like what they think should or shouldn't be in this new comp plan, so they know that they feel like they're a part of it. That will go longer than you think, and you might learn more than you think. Keep them updated in the process. So let them know, like ask them for that thing. Let them know, hey, over the next quarter, I'm going to be looking at this, and let them know what to expect. Nothing is worse than having a new comp plan sprung on you, like when you have no time to react, because you're affecting their livelihood. So I would just say it starts before you start planning, and then again, similar to have a little mini SKO, do something like get people excited. A lot of the times, too, comp plan changes aren't popular. Like a lot of times when you make those changes, there tends to be things that you're taking away. Tell them why. Be really transparent. Like let them feel heard. And I'm a big fan of getting everyone on a call, presenting it, but then making sure that managers are ready right then to go talk through it with their people. Help them understand why you're doing it, why the company is doing that, and how it can be beneficial for them as well. Like just be transparent and open with them, and start early, I guess, is kind of like the moral of the story there.
It's a tricky and ongoing process here. We're going to take this as our last question. This is actually, I haven't thought about this too much. This is a question from Victor Kim. Victor, thank you for the question here. Tanner, any thoughts on like really low fixed salaries with super aggressive compensation versus maybe really high fixed salaries with a lower or less aggressive variable compensation? Any thoughts on which environments one is better than the other?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's environment, it's people, right? So like it's the people that you want to attract is my opinion on that. If I think somewhere in the middle personally is actually the right route. I think you're going to attract more of your like motivated, but people who are looking to stay around. I think the higher your comp, the more turnover you're going to have. But in some roles, that's okay. Like there's just some businesses out there where you're going to churn through sales reps. Like call centers is a really good example. Like it's just door-to-door sales. Like it's just part of the business, and it's kind of it can really wear you down. It takes a really special person to stick it out for a long time. So I think that's what you have to keep in mind. I'm a big fan of like we could go on this forever. I'm a big fan of like 60-40, 50-50, 70-30 type of things, and depending on where you go. Although like I think that's also a great thing to talk to your person about when you're employing them, where basically like you could sit them down and say, hey, you want more variable or more base? Because there's people who want that safety. There's people who like that, who they have like kids and bills and stuff, and they just want to know that they don't have to like overly stress about it. But there's other people who even if they have that background, they're just more risk averse and understand that they can make more money if their variables heavier. So I think it just really depends on your kind of your people strategy there, more than anything else.
Yeah, I think the other thing with this too, you have to kind of assume that people want to do a good job when they come to work. I mean, there may be some social loafs out there, but regardless of where you land, you're going to get people who want to kick butt, whether it's a full base salary job. And I don't know how many full base, no variable roles there are that are in sales, but I'd imagine those people come to work just as hungry as the people that have the 50-50 comp plan. Their motivations are different. To Tanner's point, they're wired a little bit differently. Tanner, this was awesome. We're like way over time now. Thanks everybody for sticking around here. Really glad to really glad to have the chance to jam with Tanner here again. And thanks again to the team at Spiff for the long partnership. That's a wrap for the entire summit. The funnel, we can officially say the funnel is dead. Everybody who's attended here has learned a little something about how to go from thinking function out to think a little bit more customer in. We're loving the flywheel, we're loving the bow tie, and we want to thank everybody. Tanner, thank you for being the last leg of our relay. But for all of our attendees, the folks behind the scenes, all of our panelists, keynote speakers, sponsors, everybody, thank you so much. This has been an awesome experience. And Tanner, once again, on behalf of the team at MSP, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day.